The temple rejected every offering until a human girl left a crayon drawing. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The ancient temple had stood on the planet Varos for 17,000 years, its crystalline spires reaching toward three suns that bathed the world in perpetual twilight. For all those millennia, pilgrims from 1,000 species had climbed the 10,000 steps to present their offerings to the silent God, and for all those millennia, every single offering had been rejected, until the day a 6-year-old human girl left a crayon drawing on the altar. Ambassador Ethan Cole had not wanted to bring his daughter to the diplomatic summit. The gathering on Varos was meant to address the growing tensions in the Galactic Coalition, and he had argued strenuously that a child had no place among the delegates debating trade routes and territorial disputes. But his wife had fallen ill the day before departure, and the babysitter had canceled, and Ethan found himself boarding the diplomatic shuttle with little Emily, clutching a purple backpack filled with coloring books and enough crayons to stock an art supply store. The Varian delegates had been gracious about the unexpected addition to the human contingent, though Ethan noticed the way their silver eyes lingered on Emily with something between curiosity and concern. The Varosians were an ancient race, tall and willowy, with skin that shimmered like pearl and voices that sounded like wind chimes. They were also deeply religious, and their entire civilization revolved around the temple and the silent God it housed. The first 3 days of the summit proceeded without incident. Emily sat quietly in the corner of the conference hall, coloring elaborate pictures of spaceships and aliens and what Ethan assumed were supposed to be the 3 sons of Varos, rendered in enthusiastic swirls of yellow, orange, and red. The other delegates found her presence charming, and several of them stopped by during breaks to admire her artwork. It was on the 4th day that High Priestess Celara approached Ethan during the afternoon recess. She was the spiritual leader of the Varosians, a woman who appeared to be in her middle years, but who Ethan knew from his briefing materials was actually over 800 years old. She moved with a grace that made her seem to glide rather than walk, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in the chest. Celara said to Ethan with a slight bow, "We have a tradition during diplomatic gatherings. Tomorrow is the day of offering, when all visitors to Varos are invited to present a gift to the silent God at the temple. It would honor us greatly if you and your delegation would participate." Ethan hesitated. He had read about the temple and its peculiar deity. According to the historical records, the silent God had never once accepted an offering in all the millennia since the temple was built. Precious gems, technological marvels, works of art, scientific treatises, even living sacrifices in the ancient days, all had been rejected. The offerings simply remained on the altar untouched and unacknowledged until the priests removed them the following day. It was considered a great honor to make an offering anyway, a gesture of respect for the Varosian culture and the mystery at its heart. We would be honored, Ethan replied, though he was already mentally reviewing what he had brought that might serve as an appropriate gift. The diplomatic protocols had not mentioned this tradition, and he had packed nothing remotely suitable. That evening he discussed the matter with His senior advisor, a pragmatic woman named Sarah Morgan, who had been navigating diplomatic waters for 20 years. Sarah said thoughtfully, "I brought a first edition of the complete works of Shakespeare. It is a genuine antique from Earth, over 400 years old. That should suffice as an offering from our delegation." Ethan nodded gratefully. The book was indeed valuable both monetarily and culturally, and it would demonstrate humanity's respect for the Varosian traditions. Emily, however, had different ideas. "Daddy," she said that night as Ethan tucked her into bed in their guest quarters, "can I give the God a present too?" Ethan smiled and ruffled her dark curls. "Sarah is bringing something very special for all of us. You do not need to worry about it, but I want to give my own present," Emily insisted with the unmovable stubbornness that only 6-year-olds possess. "I made something." She pulled a piece of paper from her backpack and showed it to Ethan. It was one of her drawings rendered in crayon on standard white paper. The image showed what appeared to be the temple, its spires reaching upward, surrounded by stick figures holding hands. Above it all, 3 circles in yellow, orange, and red represented the suns, and scattered throughout were stars and hearts, and what might have been flowers or possibly spaceships. In the corner, in Emily's careful printing, were the words to the God from Emily, "I hope you like it." Ethan felt his throat tighten. The drawing was objectively exactly what one would expect from a 6-year-old. Enthusiastic and sincere and utterly lacking in technical skill. Next to a 400-year-old Shakespeare folio, it would seem almost insulting. "Honey, that is beautiful," Ethan said carefully, "but I think Sarah's book will be enough for our whole delegation. Why don't you keep this picture for yourself?" Emily's lower lip trembled. "But I made it for the God." "Daddy, it would be mean not to give it." Ethan sighed. He knew that tone. Emily had inherited her mother's empathy and her father's stubbornness, a combination that made her impossible to dissuade. Once she had decided something was the right thing to do. "We will see," he said, using the universal parental phrase that meant no. "But I am too tired to argue about it right now." The next morning, the diplomatic delegations assembled at the base of the 10,000 steps. There were representatives from 47 different species, each carrying their offering. For the silent god, the Century ambassador held a sphere of pure energy contained in a stasis field. The Morlack delegation had brought a living crystal that sang when light touched it. The Hellion contingent carried a scroll containing mathematical proofs that they claimed demonstrated the fundamental nature of reality itself. Sarah held the Shakespeare folio carefully wrapped in preservation cloth, and Ethan carried Emily, who had insisted on wearing her favorite dress, a purple thing with white flowers that her grandmother had given her for her birthday. In her small backpack he knew was the crayon drawing. The climb was long and difficult. The steps had been designed for Vero's physiology, each one slightly higher and deeper than was comfortable for human legs. By the time they reached the halfway point, Ethan was breathing hard, and several of the other delegates had activated their personal gravity assists. Only the Varosians moved with ease, gliding upward as though the climb required no effort at all. Emily, perched on her father's shoulders, pointed out interesting rock formations and cloud shapes and kept up a running commentary on which aliens looked the friendliest. The Century Ambassador, being of pure thought inhabiting crystalline body, found this hilarious and began pointing out shapes in return, leading to an animated conversation about whether a particular cloud looked more like a rabbit or a spaceship. By the time they reached the top, Ethan's legs were shaking and his shirt was soaked with sweat, but the view made the effort worthwhile. From the temple's plateau they could see the entire valley spread below, the capital city of Varos glittering like a jewel among the purple forests. The three suns hung at different points in the sky, casting overlapping shadows that created patterns of light unlike anything found on Earth. The temple itself was magnificent. Its walls appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal, though Ethan knew from his briefings that no one actually understood what material comprised its structure. The walls shifted color slowly, cycling through shades of blue and violet and silver. No doors barred entry, just an archway tall enough for even the largest species to pass through comfortably. High Priestess Celera stood at the entrance along with a dozen other priests and priestesses. She welcomed each delegation with words in their own language, a feat made possible by the translator implants all coalition members wore, but which still impressed Ethan with its grace and sincerity. When the human delegation approached, Celera bowed deeply. Ambassador Cole Young, Emily, you honor us with your presence. Please enter and approach the altar when you are ready. The interior of the temple was vast and empty. No pews or decorations adorned the space. The walls continued their slow color shift, and the floor was perfectly smooth crystal that reflected the light from above. At the far end of the chamber, perhaps 200 m from the entrance, stood the altar. It was surprisingly simple, just a raised platform of the same crystal as the rest of the temple, about waist-high for an average human. Upon it rested dozens of offerings from previous ceremonies, all rejected and waiting to be cleared away. Ethan saw jewels, technological devices, artistic masterpieces, and objects whose purpose he could not begin to guess. Above the altar, the air shimmered with something that was not quite light and not quite energy. This, Ethan knew, was the closest anyone had ever come to perceiving the silent God itself. The entity, if it could be called that, had never spoken, never moved, never acknowledged any offering or prayer or visitor in 17,000 years. It simply existed, a presence that could be felt, but never truly seen or understood. One by one, the delegations approached. The Century Ambassador placed their energy sphere on the altar and spoke a prayer. In their harmonic language, the sphere pulsed with light for a moment, then simply sat there, inert. Rejected. The Morlock delegation set down their singing crystal. It chimed beautifully as light from the three suns streamed through the temple's transparent ceiling, but the shimmer above the altar did not change. Rejected. The Hellions presented their mathematical scroll with great ceremony. The lead scientist among them read several passages aloud, equations that supposedly prove the underlying structure of spacetime. The shimmer remained unchanged. Rejected. On and on it went. 47 delegations, 47 offerings, 47 rejections. The priests showed no disappointment. They had witnessed this, seen thousands of times. It was simply the way of things. Finally, Sarah approached with the Shakespeare folio. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing the leather binding worn smooth by centuries. She opened it to Hamlet and read a passage, her voice carrying clearly in the crystal chamber, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing in them, it was beautiful, even the translator implants which converted her words into the native languages of all present seemed to capture the poetry and power of the text. Sarah closed the book gently and placed it on the altar with a bow. The shimmer did not change. Rejected, Sarah stepped back without disappointment. She had not expected acceptance. No one did. The offering was the gesture itself, the acknowledgement of something greater than oneself, even if that something never acknowledged you. In return, Ethan prepared to leave, but Emily tugged at his hand. Daddy, I want to give my picture now. He looked down at his daughter's earnest face and felt his resolve crumble. What harm could it do? The God rejected everything anyway. Let her have this moment of participating, of feeling like she had contributed. Okay, sweetie, Ethan said quietly. Go ahead. Emily pulled the folded paper from her backpack, carefully smoothed out the creases, and walked toward the altar. She was so small that the platform came up to her chest. She had to stand on her tiptoes to slide the drawing onto the surface, placing it carefully beside the Shakespeare folio. Then she did something no other delegate had done. She did not bow or pray or read aloud. Instead, she simply looked up at the shimmer and spoke in her clear, high voice. High God, Emily said, I made this for you. I know it is not fancy like the other presents, but I worked really hard on it. See, these are the suns and this is your temple, and these are all the people holding hands because I think everybody should be friends, and these are flowers because flowers are pretty and they make people happy. I hope you like it, even if you do not. That is okay. My daddy says it is the thought that counts. She smiled at the shimmer, gave a little wave, and turned to walk back to Ethan. That was when it happened. The shimmer moved. It had never moved before in 17,000 years. Through countless offerings, the presence above the altar had remained constant and unchanging, but now it flowed downward like liquid light and touched the crayon drawing. The entire temple filled with a sound like music and wind and the ringing of bells all at once. The crystal walls blazed with color, cycling through the entire spectrum in seconds. Every delegate, every priest, every living being in that chamber felt something, a presence in their mind that was not thought or emotion, but somehow both and neither. The drawing lifted from the altar, suspended in the shimmer, and then it simply vanished, not rejected and left behind like every other offering, but accepted, taken, absorbed into whatever incomprehensible existence the silent God possessed. The silence that followed was absolute. 47 delegations, a dozen priests, and one human child stood frozen in shock. High Priestess Seller was the first to move. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking as she spoke. In 17,000 years, in 17,000 years, an offering has been accepted. The silent God has spoken. Emily looked confused. Did I do something wrong? Ethan scooped her up, holding her tight, his own heart pounding. No, sweetie, you did something amazing. I just do not know what yet. The next hours were chaos. The news spread across Varos in minutes, transmitted to the coalition in hours. The temple that had stood silent for millennia had finally acknowledged an offering, and it had been a crayon, drawing from a human child. Theologians, scientists, philosophers, and politicians all wanted answers, but there were none to give. The silent God had taken Emily's gift and then returned to its customary silence. The diplomatic summit was effectively over. No one could focus on trade disputes and territorial negotiations when the fundamental nature of Verosian religion had just been upended. The delegates departed one by one, but not before each of them stopped to speak with Emily to see the child who had accomplished what no being had managed in 17,000 years. Emily, for her part, seemed mostly abused by the attention. She did not understand why everyone was making such a fuss. She had just wanted to give the God a present because that seemed like the nice thing to do. Ethan and Emily remained on Varos at the request of High Priestess Celera. The priestess needed time to process what had happened, to consult the ancient text to try to understand the meaning behind the acceptance. On the third day after the offering, Celera invited Ethan and Emily to her private chambers in the temple complex. The room was simple but beautiful, with walls of living crystal that hummed softly and furniture that seemed to grow organically from the floor. Celera said, settling onto a seat that adjusted itself to her form. I have spent these days in meditation and study, seeking to understand why the silent God accepted your daughter's offering when it rejected 17,000 years of gifts from the greatest minds and artists and leaders in the galaxy. Ethan held Emily in his lap. She was coloring in a new book, apparently unconcerned with the theological crisis she had precipitated. And have you found an answer? Celera smiled, and for the first time since Ethan had met her, she looked truly at peace. I have a theory, she said. For millennia we approached the silent God with offerings of value, things we deemed worthy of a deity. We brought our greatest treasures, our most profound thoughts, our most beautiful creations. We came with expectations of recognition, of validation, of proof that our worth could be measured and acknowledged. She leaned forward, her silver eyes focused on Emily. But your daughter brought none of that. She brought a simple drawing, made with love and care, offered not because she sought recognition, but because she thought it would make the God happy. She brought innocence and sincerity and joy without expectation of return. Ethan felt something click in his mind. You think the God wanted simple kindness, not grand gestures, but genuine connection. Celera nodded slowly. I think the silent God has been waiting all these millennia for someone to approach, not with ego or ambition or even reverence, but with pure, unselfish affection. Your daughter did not try to impress. She did not seek favor. She simply wanted to share something that brought her joy, to make someone else happy. That is a gift beyond price. Emily looked up from her coloring. Is the God lonely? The question hung in the air like a bell tone. Sarah's eyes widened, and Ethan felt his breath catch. Out of the mouths of babes, he thought, came wisdom that adults spent lifetimes seeking. I do not know, child said softly, but I think perhaps you understood something about the silent God that none of us in all our study and devotion ever considered. Perhaps silence is not always a choice. Perhaps it is a barrier, and you found a way through it. Over the following weeks, as word of Emily's accepted offering spread throughout the coalition, something Unexpected happened. People began to visit the temple in unprecedented numbers, but they came differently than before. Instead of bringing treasures and technological marvels, they brought simple gifts, handwritten letters, pressed flowers, drawings, and poems, and songs, offerings made with love rather than calculated value. The silent God did not accept them all. In fact, most remained on the altar, eventually cleared away by the priests. But sometimes, perhaps once a week or once a month, an offering would be taken. Child's handprint in clay, a love letter from an elderly couple celebrating their 100th anniversary, a photograph of a family reunion, always something personal, always something given with pure intent. The theological implications shook several major religions to their foundations. If the most powerful entity known to the galaxy valued simple love and kindness over grand displays of devotion, what did that say about the nature of divinity itself? Philosophers wrote treatises. Scientists tried to quantify emotional sincerity. The Varosian priesthood underwent a massive reformation, shifting from elaborate rituals to teachings about compassion and genuine connection. Ethan and Emily returned to Earth after 6 weeks on Varos. The diplomatic summit had been reconvened and successfully concluded with the revelations about the silent God, creating an unexpected atmosphere of cooperation and goodwill. It was hard to argue over trade routes when everyone had just witnessed a fundamental truth about the universe, that kindness mattered more than power. Emily went back to first grade and continued making crayon drawings, though now her teachers looked at them with a certain reverence that made Ethan uncomfortable. He did his best to keep her life normal, to protect her from the weight of expectation that came from being the child who had touched the untouchable. But the universe had other plans. 3 months after the offering, the silent God spoke, not in words exactly, but in a transmission that every translator in the galaxy rendered into comprehensible form. It was broadcast simultaneously to every coalition world, every ship, every outpost. Billions of beings heard it at once. The message was simple: thank you, Emily. Your gift reminded me of beauty I had forgotten. In silence I waited. In noise I withdrew, but in your simple joy I found hope again. Tell your kind that their capacity for love without agenda is their greatest strength. Tell them it will save them when power fails. The transmission ended, and the silent God returned to silence, but the message had been clear enough. Humanity, the newest and often underestimated members of the Galactic Coalition, possessed something that even the oldest and most advanced species had lost or never understood: the ability to give without expectation, to love without calculation, to find joy in simple kindness. The political ramifications were immediate and profound. The species that had viewed humans as primitive or naive suddenly looked at them with new respect. The coalition restructured its leadership council to include Earth in a more prominent position. Humanities, cultural exports, things like children's books and folk music and handmade crafts, became valued throughout the galaxy in ways that technology and weapons never could have achieved. Ethan watched all of this unfold with a mixture of pride and trepidation. He had spent his career navigating the complex politics of interspecies relations, trying to prove that humanity deserved a seat at the table, and his 6-year-old Daughter had done more for Earth's standing with a crayon drawing than all his diplomatic efforts combined. Emily herself handled the attention with remarkable grace for someone so young. When reporters asked her why she thought the god had accepted her gift, she said, "Simply because I made it with my favorite crayons and I wanted them to be happy." When philosophers pressed her for deeper insight, she shrugged and said, "Being nice is important, my mommy says." So, the Verosian priesthood began a tradition of inviting one human child to the temple each year to make an offering, not as a political gesture, but as a reminder of what had been learned. The children came with drawings and clay sculptures and handwritten stories, and while not every offering was accepted, enough were that it became clear the silent God genuinely appreciated these simple expressions of affection. Years passed. Emily grew up, as children do, but she never lost the essential quality that had moved an ancient deity. She became an artist, creating works that captured the same joy and sincerity of her childhood. Drawings, just with more technical skill. Her exhibitions attracted beings from across the galaxy, not because her art was revolutionary in technique, but because it carried that same pure, emotional honesty. On her 18th birthday, Emily returned to Varos with her father. The temple had changed in the intervening years. Where once it had been a place of solemn mystery, it was now filled with laughter and music and the chaos of visitors who came not to be odd but to share joy. Children ran through the crystal halls, their giggles echoing off the walls. Families left offerings together, working on drawings and sculptures as a shared activity. The priests moved among them not as austere authority figures, but as guides and friends. High Priestess Salara, now over 812 years old, greeted Emily with a warm embrace. "You have grown so much, child, though I suppose I should not call you that anymore." Emily smiled. "You can call me whatever you like. You are the closest thing I have to a Verosian grandmother." They walked together to the altar, now surrounded by offerings of every kind, drawings and poems, yes, but also photographs and letters, pressed flowers and handmade jewelry, children's toys and adults' heartfelt prayers. Some would be accepted, most would not, but all were given with love. "I never told you," Salara said quietly, "what I felt that day when the silent God moved for the first time. I had served in this temple for 700 years, making offerings every day, praying for acknowledgement. That never came. I had made peace with that, or so I thought. But when your drawing was taken, I realized I had been angry all along, angry at the silence, angry at the rejection, angry at serving a God that seemed not to care. And now," Emily asked, "now I understand that the silent God always cared. We were the ones who did not understand how to reach it. We brought our achievements and our pride and our desperation for validation. You brought joy simply because you had joy to share. That was the key we had searched for millennia to find." Emily looked up at the shimmer above the altar, that eternal presence that had waited so long for someone to understand. "Can I ask you something? Of course, child. Do you think the God is still lonely sometimes?" Seller considered the question. "I think," she said slowly, "that loneliness requires the capacity for connection. The silent God could have remained entirely apart, untouched and untouchable, but it chose to accept your offering and others. Since I think it is not lonely anymore, I think it is healing. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a new drawing. Over the years she had brought one every time she visited, never making a ceremony of it, just adding to the collection on the altar. This one showed the temple surrounded by people of all species, all holding hands and smiling. Above them, the shimmer of the silent God was rendered in silver and gold, no longer separate but part of the community it watched over. She placed it on the altar gently. I hope you still like my pictures, she said to the shimmer. I am not as good with crayons anymore because my hands are bigger, but I tried my best. Thank you for teaching everyone that being kind is more important than being impressive. Galaxy needed to learn that. The shimmer pulsed once, a brief acknowledgement. That might have been imagination, or might have been divine response. Drawing remained on the altar, neither accepted nor rejected in that moment. Simply present, as Emily and Celera walked back toward the temple entrance. Ethan joined them. He had been watching from the side, giving his daughter space for her private moment. You know, he said, I have been thinking about what the silent God said in that transmission about humanity's capacity for love without agenda being our greatest strength. Emily looked at her father curiously. What about it? I think it was not just complimenting us, Ethan said. I think it was warning us. The galaxy is vast and often cruel. Power and technology and military might have their place, but they can only take us so far. If we lose our ability to connect with others genuinely, if we become cynical or calculating, we will lose the very thing that makes us special. Emily linked her arm through his. Then we just have to make sure we do not lose it. We teach it to our children. We practice it every day. We remember that being powerful is not as important as being good. Seller smiled at them both. Your species is young in the eyes of the galaxy, but you carry wisdom that some races never learn in millions of years. I think that is why the silent God chose Emily's offering. It saw in humanity hope that we older species had forgotten we could possess. They descended the 10,000 steps together, the three sons of Varos painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Below them the capital city sparkled with lights from 1,000 species, all living together in greater harmony than had existed before. A child's simple gift had changed everything. The story of Emily and the silent God became one of the foundational myths of the new galactic age. It was taught in schools across 100 worlds, not as religious doctrine, but as a lesson in empathy and connection. Artists created works inspired by it. Musicians composed symphonies about it. Politicians invoked it when arguing for compassion over expediency. But for Emily it remained simply the time she gave a god a picture and made a friend. She continued visiting Varos every year, and every year she left a new drawing. Some were accepted, some were not, but it did not matter. She had learned young that the value of a gift was not in its acceptance but in the love with which it was given. Humanity too learned this lesson and carried it forward. As Earth integrated more fully into the galactic coalition, humans became known not as warriors or innovators or conquerors. Though they were certainly capable of all those things, they became known as the species that remembered how to care without condition, how to find joy in simple things, how to offer kindness without expectation of reward. When Conflicts arose between species. It was often human mediators who found solutions not through superior negotiation tactics, but through genuine empathy. When disasters struck, human aid workers were among the first to arrive and the last to leave, not seeking glory but simply doing what they felt was right. When new species joined the coalition, uncertain and overwhelmed, it was frequently humans who welcomed them with open arms and patient guidance. The other species of the galaxy, those ancient races who had explored and conquered and built civilizations while humanity was still learning to make fire, found themselves learning from the newcomers. The Zenturi, beings of pure thought and logic, began studying human literature to understand emotion. The Morex master craftsmen who had created wonders of unparalleled beauty started making simple things with their hands just for the joy of creation. The Hellions, whose mathematics could describe the structure of reality, discovered the equal validity of poetry and song, and at the center of it all stood the temple on Varos, no longer a monument to divine silence, but a celebration of connection. The silent God still rarely accepted offerings, but when it did, they were always gifts, given with pure heart. A child's drawing, a widow's letter to her deceased spouse, a sculpture made by rivals who had reconciled their differences, small things by galactic standards but containing within them the essence of what made life meaningful. Ethan Cole served as Earth's ambassador for another 15 years before retiring to write his memoirs. The book, titled What My Daughter Taught the Galaxy, became a bestseller across coalition space. In it, he reflected on the strange path that had led from a frustrated father bringing his child to a diplomatic summit to a fundamental shift in how 1,000 species understood their place in the cosmos. The final chapter of the book was simply Emily's original crayon drawing, preserved and reproduced with her permission. Beneath it, Ethan had written, "This is what changed everything, not because it was beautiful by conventional standards, not because it demonstrated skill or wealth or power, but because it was made with love and given with joy. If the galaxy can remember this lesson, if we can approach our challenges and each other with even a fraction of the pure sincerity my daughter showed that day, there is no problem we cannot solve, no distance we cannot bridge, no silence we cannot fill with understanding." Emily herself eventually married a Varosian diplomat named Telin, a partnership that symbolized the growing connection between their species. They had 3 children, each of whom made the pilgrimage to the temple to leave their own offerings. The silent God accepted one, a clay impression of a baby's hand, and Ethan wept when he heard the news, moved beyond words by the continuity of grace. On the 50th anniversary of the original offering, the coalition declared a galaxy-wide day of celebration called the Festival of Simple Gifts. Beings of every species were encouraged to make something with their own hands and give it to someone they cared about, not purchased or manufactured, but personally created. The day became one of the most beloved holidays in coalition space, a time when the complexity and stress of modern life gave way to the simple pleasure of making others happy. Emily, now 56 years old and a grandmother herself, returned to Varos for the festival. High Priestess Celera had passed away 5 years earlier, mourned by the entire planet. But the current High Priest, a younger version named Kellen greeted Emily with the same warmth his predecessor had shown. "Welcome home," he said, because over the decades the temple had become as much Emily's home as Earth. She climbed the 10,000 steps one more time, her granddaughter Lily holding her hand. The child was 7, bright-eyed and curious, carrying her own drawing to add to the altar. It showed a great tree with branches spreading wide, and on each branch sat different alien species, all smiling. At the altar, Emily and Lily placed their drawings side by side. Emily's was more skilled now, decades of practice showing in the confident lines and subtle shading, but it carried the same emotional honesty as her first offering. It depicted the temple as she saw it now, not as an imposing monument, but as a warm gathering place where beings from across the galaxy came to remember what mattered most. Lily's drawing, like Emily's had been so long ago, was enthusiastic and sincere and utterly unself-conscious. She had used every color in her crayon box, creating a riot of hues that somehow worked together in the way only a child's art could manage. "I hope you like them," Lily said to the shimmer, unconsciously echoing her grandmother's words from 5 decades earlier. "We made them for you because Grandma says you are nice and you like pictures." Shimmer pulsed and both drawings lifted into the air. For a moment they hung suspended, Emily's sophisticated rendering and Lily's exuberant scribbles side by side, then gently both vanished, accepted into whatever realm the silent God inhabited. Emily felt tears on her cheeks. After all these years, after all the changes she had witnessed and been part of, the simple act of having her offering accepted still moved her profoundly. Beside her, Lily bounced with excitement, delighted that the God had liked her present. As they turned to leave, Emily felt something she had not experienced since that first day 50 years ago, a presence in her mind, not intrusive but gentle, like a hand on her shoulder or a whisper in her ear. It did not speak in words, but she understood its meaning as clearly as if it had. "Thank you for remembering me. Thank you for teaching others to remember. In you and your kind I found hope. In that hope I found purpose. Silence is broken, not because I speak, but because you listened." The presence faded, leaving Emily with a profound sense of peace. She looked at her granddaughter, at the priests moving through the temple, at the hundreds of visitors who had come to leave their simple gifts and share their joy. "What did you feel, Grandma?" Lily asked. Sensing something had happened, Emily knelt down to her granddaughter's level. Meeting her eyes, "I felt love," she said simply, "love without condition, without expectation, without agenda. The kind of love you showed when you made your picture just to make someone happy." Lily hugged her grandmother tightly. "I love you, Grandma. I love you too, sweetheart." And that love, that simple, pure affection, is the most powerful force in the entire galaxy. Never forget that. They descended the steps together. 3 generations of humanity connected by a lesson learned long ago. Behind them, the temple shimmered in the light of 3 suns, no longer silent in its purpose but clear in its message. Love matters, kindness matters, the simple joy of making someone else happy matters more than all the treasures and technologies and grand achievements the galaxy could offer. Humanity had learned this lesson and taught it to the stars. And in doing so, they had proven that sometimes the greatest strength was not in being the strongest or the smartest, or the most advanced. Sometimes the greatest strength was simply in being kind. As the festival celebrations began, in earnest, with music and laughter filling the valley below the temple, Emily looked up at the three suns and smiled. 50 years ago, she had been a 6-year-old girl who just wanted to give a god a present. Now she was a grandmother watching her own granddaughter learn the same lesson of generosity and love. The galaxy had changed in those 50 years, grown kinder and more connected, but the fundamental truth remained. It was not grand gestures that moved hearts, divine or otherwise. It was the small acts of kindness, the simple expressions of love, the willingness to give without expectation of return. A crayon drawing had changed everything, not because it was exceptional in skill, but because it was exceptional in heart. And that Emily thought as she held her granddaughter's hand and walked into the celebration below was the most human thing of all. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments. Whether positive or negative, your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like.